All right, buckle up because you've sent us down quite the rabbit hole for this deep dive.
That's a good one.
It is, it is. We're diving into this YouTube video all about 7 hidden sins.
Ooh, hidden sins.
Yeah, that might be blocking blessings in your life.
Okay.
And it's all based on the teachings of Padre Pio.
Interesting, right.
Yeah, so right off the bat,
I mean,
it's interesting how they're framed. It's not the obvious, like, thou shalt nots.
right.
You know?
Like the big ones, the commandments?
Yeah, it's not those. They're more like these sneaky, these little patterns
Uh-huh.
that could be holding us back.
Spiritually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Padre Pio, if you don't know,
Not everyone's going to know.
was this revered Catholic saint and mystic known for giving really wise spiritual guidance.
Mm-hmm.
But don't worry, this isn't a religious lecture or anything like that.
Right.
We're approaching this from a broader perspective, exploring these concepts and how they might be relevant to anyone's life, regardless of their beliefs.
Yeah, that's what I find so compelling about this. It's like these ideas about personal growth, self-awareness really resonate across many different spiritual and philosophical traditions.
Okay, so the first hidden sin the video tackles is pride.
Pride.
And, you know, we all like to think we're pretty humble, right?
Yeah.
But Padre Pio suggests that pride can be super sneaky, often disguised as self-sufficiency, or that drive to be perfect. I know I can totally fall into that trap myself, always thinking like, I got this.
Oh, yeah. You think you don't need help,
Yeah, exact.
even when you're struggling.
Yeah.
And then you set these impossibly high standards for yourself. And you beat yourself up for not meeting them. It's exhausting.
Yeah, it's like our culture almost celebrates that I can do it all myself mentality, but is that really serving us in the long run, you know? This video seems to suggest that true strength comes from a place of humility, recognizing that we're not superhuman and that it's okay to ask for help.
And that's where the idea of surrendering to something bigger than ourselves comes in. Whether that's, a higher power or a community or just acknowledging we don't have all the answers. It's a humbling experience, for sure.
Yeah.
But it can also be incredibly liberating.
Now, speaking of things that can weigh us down, the second sin on the list is resentment.
Resentment.
Have you ever felt like your prayers, your efforts, they're just not getting through? Like there's some invisible wall
Yeah.
blocking you.
Blocking you.
The video suggests that holding on to resentment might be creating that wall.
That's interesting.
It is, and it even quotes this powerful passage from the Bible to emphasize this point.
Okay.
Matthew 6.14:15. If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses.
Okay, so
Whoa.
that's pretty intense. But I think it speaks to how much power we give to those past hurts when we refuse to let them go.
Everyone's been wronged at some point, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay
Yeah.
or letting someone off the hook. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of that anger and bitterness.
So if
And that holding on to those negative feelings ultimately hurts you more than anyone else.
it's like we're chained
Yes.
to that past hurt.
Exactly.
But what's interesting is you mentioned the idea of forgiveness being for our own benefit. Even if we don't subscribe to a particular religious belief, there's a lot of research showing that holding on to resentment is terrible for our mental and physical health, raises stress levels, impacts our relationships, just not worth it.
That's such an important point. Forgiveness really is a gift we give ourselves.
Uh-huh.
And it's not easy.
No.
It takes a lot of courage and self-compassion
Mm-hmm.
to work through those painful emotions. But the video suggests that it's a crucial step on the path to spiritual growth and inner peace.
I love that. A gift we give ourselves. Okay, so we've tackled pride, we've tackled resentment. Now this next one is a biggie, and I'll admit, something I personally struggle with sometimes. Fear.
Fear.
I mean,
We all experience fear. It's a natural human emotion. But the video suggests that when fear starts controlling our lives, dictating our choices, then it becomes a spiritual obstacle.
right. And the video actually uses another impactful quote from Mark 5.36. It says, "Do not be afraid, just believe." Now, I don't think that means we should just ignore all our fears and jump blindly into everything, right?
Definitely not. It's more about recognizing when fear is holding us back from living fully, from pursuing those things that truly matter to us.
Right.
It's about learning to trust ourselves, to trust in something bigger than ourselves, and to trust that we have the strength to overcome those challenges.
So it's about,
But that can be hard. It
yeah.
can be very hard.
I think it's about discerning between fear that protects us from real danger and fear that keeps us stuck in our comfort zones. preventing us from growing.
Exactly. The video seems to be saying that choosing faith over fear is what allows us to move forward, to take those risks and embrace the unknown. But what does faith even mean if you're not particularly religious?
Right.
Right.
That's a great question, and I think it gets to the heart of how we can apply these teachings to our own lives. Maybe faith in this context means having confidence in our own abilities, believing that we can handle whatever challenges come our way.
Or maybe it means having faith in the goodness of humanity,
Eh.
or in the inherent resilience of the human spirit. It's about finding that inner strength and conviction that allows us to face our fears and keep moving forward.
All right, so we've covered pride, resentment, fear. Now, this next hidden sin is an interesting one, and it's one that can be really easy to fall into, I think, without even realizing it.
Okay.
Spiritual indifference.
Spiritual indifference, all right.
You ever feel like your spiritual practices, whatever they may be, has become kind of routine?
Oh, yeah.
Like you're just going through the motions
Totally.
and really feeling the heart of it anymore.
Going through the motions. Yeah, I've been there.
Oh, yeah.
It's like when you first start exploring spirituality. Everything is new and exciting, but then life gets in the way. Things can start to feel stale.
Right, exactly. The video calls this lukewarm faith, and suggests it can actually be a slippery slope.
Interesting.
Padre Pio warned that this kind of spiritual apathy can make us vulnerable to negativity. But what does that look like, practically?
Yeah. What does that look like? What would be an example?
Well, I think it goes back to that idea of being intentional. If we're not actively nurturing our spiritual side, it's easier to get sort of pulled off track
Yeah.
by all the distractions and the demands of everyday life. It's like our spiritual muscles get weak if we don't exercise them.
I like that. That's a great analogy. So what would it look like to exercise those spiritual muscles? This video doesn't get into specifics, but it feels like there's this invitation to rediscover that spark.
Right. And I think it's about recognizing that spiritual growth is a continuous journey, not a destination. It requires effort. It requires intentionality.
So instead of just going through the motions, it's about asking ourselves, what practices truly nourish my soul? What brings me a sense of connection and purpose? And then, most importantly, how can I make those practices a regular part of my life, even when things get busy?
I love that. It's about being mindful and intentional in our spiritual lives. And speaking of things that can sidetrack us from that mindful state, let's talk about the fifth hidden sin on the list. Envy.
Envy.
That little twinge we get when we see someone else's success. You know, a little too much money, a little too much happiness.
We all experience envy sometimes. It's normal. But the video suggests that it can be more than just a fleeting feeling. It argues that envy can actually attract negativity and hold us back from achieving our own goals.
Yeah, because when we're so focused on what other people have, we're not putting our energy into creating our own path. We're essentially giving away our power.
Exactly. And the video quotes a powerful verse from James 3.16, which says, "For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice." Strong words.
It really makes you think. If we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, it's easy to get caught in a cycle of negativity and self-doubt, and we start to focus on what we lack instead of appreciating our own strengths and blessings.
Right. So what's the antidote to this envy trap? Well, the video, drawing on Padre Pio's teachings, suggests that we focus on cultivating gratitude. It encourages us to celebrate our own accomplishments no matter how small they may seem.
I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from scarcity to abundance. Instead of feeling resentful of other people's success, what if we chose to be inspired by them?
Right. And the video also encourages us to recognize that everyone's journey is unique. We don't have to compare our chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20.
So true. Now, this next hidden sin feels particularly relevant in our modern world, where we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more, do more, be more, excessive attachment to material possessions.
It's so easy to get caught up in the pursuit of stuff, especially in our consumer-driven culture. But the video reminds us that true happiness and fulfillment don't come from external possessions.
And they actually use a very pointed quote from the Bible to illustrate this point. Matthew 6.24, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money."
Wow, that's pretty powerful. Really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it?
It does.
What are our true priorities?
Right.
Are we placing too much emphasis on material wealth at the expense of our relationships, our spiritual growth, or our own inner peace?
It's a question we all need to ask ourselves, honestly. Because if we're constantly chasing the next shiny object, we're likely to miss out on the true treasures in life, the things that money can't buy.
Exactly. And the video doesn't condemn wealth or possessions outright. It's more about recognizing when our attachment to those things becomes excessive, when it starts to control our thoughts and behaviors, and ultimately our happiness.
Okay, so we've covered 6 hidden sins so far, and they've all been pretty thought-provoking. But this last one really gets to the heart of what it means to be human.
Okay, what's that?
Lack of love for others.
Lack of love for others.
I mean, loving others should be easy, right?
It sounds simple enough, but the video delves into the subtle ways we might fall short in this area. And it's not just about grand gestures of love, it's about how we treat people in our everyday interactions.
So we're not talking about robbing banks.
Right. It's more about the little things. Those moments when we choose judgment over compassion, gossip over kindness, or indifference over empathy.
Ouch, I can definitely see myself falling short in those areas sometimes.
I think we all can.
Mm.
And the video emphasizes Padre Pio's belief that love is action. It's not just a feeling. It's about how we treat others, how we choose to show up in the world.
I love that. It's about putting love into practice, even when it's challenging, even when we're dealing with, difficult people.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that we're all connected and that our actions have a ripple effect.
So I'm curious, out of these first 7, what has stood out to you the most? Which ones resonated most strongly with your own experiences?
I'm drawn to the idea of resentment and forgiveness.
Okay.
I think we've all been hurt by others at some point, and it's easy to get stuck in that cycle of blame and anger. But the video's message about forgiveness being a gift we give ourselves really struck a chord with me.
For me, I think the sin of pride really hit home, I'm definitely someone who likes to be in control. And that idea of surrendering to something bigger than myself can feel pretty daunting. But I also see how clinging to that control can lead to stress and burnout.
It's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing when our need for control is actually holding us back from experiencing true peace and joy.
Absolutely. And that's what's so great about this whole deep dive. It's not about condemning ourselves for our imperfections, but about recognizing those patterns that might be holding us back and exploring ways to grow and evolve.
Right. It's about using these insights as a springboard for self-reflection and positive change.
Exactly. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, but there's still more to explore.
Picking up where we left off, you've given us a lot to think about with this video and these 7 hidden sins.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how they're presented, not as these big obvious transgressions,
Right.
but as these subtle, almost sneaky patterns that can creep into our lives and block blessings or even just hold us back from experiencing true happiness and fulfillment.
You're so right. And it's been really interesting to hear your personal reflections on these sins, especially resentment and forgiveness and my own struggles with pride and control. I think what makes this video so compelling is it doesn't just present these concepts in a preachy or judgmental way. It really encourages us to look inward.
Right.
And see how these patterns might be playing out in our own lives.
And to approach that self-reflection with a sense of curiosity and compassion, rather than shame or guilt.
Exactly. It's not about beating ourselves up for our imperfections, but about using these insights as a starting point for growth.
Right.
So, with that in mind, let's revisit that idea of pride for a moment. The video makes this really interesting point about how pride can sometimes disguise itself as strength or determination.
It's that I've got this attitude we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But the video argues that true strength actually comes from humility, from recognizing our limits and being open to help from others, and maybe even from a higher power.
It's almost like our culture celebrates that go it alone mentality. But is that really serving us? I mean, think about those times you've tried to do everything yourself and ended up feeling overwhelmed and exhausted.
It's a recipe for burnout, for sure. And the video suggests that there's a different way, a path that involves surrendering some of that control and trusting that something bigger than ourselves is at work.
So how can someone who is so used to being in control actually learn to surrender?
Yeah.
What does that even look like?
That's a great question. And I think it starts with small steps.
Okay.
Maybe it's about asking for help when you need it, instead of trying to do everything yourself.
Right.
Or delegating tasks at work, or even just learning to say no when you're feeling overextended.
Those are great practical suggestions. It's about recognizing that we don't have to do everything alone. And that's a powerful realization.
It is. And speaking of powerful realizations, let's talk about resentment again. The video really delves into the damaging effects of holding on to anger and bitterness, suggesting that resentment not only blocks blessings, but also poisons our relationships and robs us of inner peace.
It's like carrying around this heavy weight,
Right.
right?
It weighs us down emotionally and spiritually.
Yeah, and the video reminds us that forgiveness is the key to releasing that weight, but it also acknowledges that forgiveness can be incredibly difficult,
Yeah.
especially when we've been deeply hurt.
Uh-huh.
But how do you even begin to forgive someone who has really hurt you?
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
I think it starts with recognizing that holding on to that anger is only hurting you. It's not punishing the other person, it's keeping you trapped in the past. And then it's about finding a way to release that anger, whether it's through journaling, talking to a therapist, or even just visualizing yourself letting go of that burden.
And I think it's important to remember that forgiveness is a process. It's not a switch we can just flip on and off. It
Correct.
takes time,
Yeah.
and it's often messy, but the video suggests that it's ultimately a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And the video also emphasizes that we don't have to do it alone.
Right.
We can call on a higher power for help or lean on our support system. It's about surrendering the hurt and trusting that healing is possible.
I love that. And I think that sense of trust is really important as we move on to the next hidden sin, fear. The video makes this distinction between fear that paralyzes us and fear that serves as a healthy caution.
We talked about this earlier, about recognizing when fear is holding us back from pursuing our dreams or living fully.
Right. So how can we tell the difference between fear that's protecting us and fear that's limiting us?
Well, I think it comes down to asking ourselves, what is this fear trying to tell me?
Uh-huh.
Is it warning me of a real danger, or is it simply trying to keep me in my comfort zone?
So it's about listening to our intuition,
Mm.
but also being willing to challenge those fears that might be holding us back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the video suggests that we can overcome those paralyzing fears by deepening our faith. It's about trusting that we're guided and protected, even when we face challenges.
It's about remembering that, quote, do not be afraid, just believe.
Mm.
Faith can be a powerful antidote to fear.
Yeah.
But what about when we're struggling to find that faith?
Right.
What if we're feeling lost and unsure of ourselves?
That's where the next hidden sin comes in.
Yeah.
Spiritual indifference.
Yeah.
The video paints a vivid picture of what it looks like to go through the motions of our spiritual practices without really engaging our hearts and minds.
It's like we're just going through the motions
Mm.
without really connecting to the meaning,
Right.
and it can leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Exactly. And the video suggests that this kind of spiritual apathy can actually make us more susceptible to negative influences because we're not actively nurturing our spiritual side.
So what does the video suggest we do about this spiritual indifference? How can we rekindle that spark,
Yeah.
that sense of connection and purpose?
Well, it encourages us to examine our spiritual practices and find ways to make them more meaningful. Maybe it's about trying a new form of prayer or meditation, or finding a spiritual community that resonates with us.
Or maybe it's as simple as spending more time in nature,
Mm.
or listening to music that uplifts our spirits.
Those are great ideas. And I think it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to spirituality.
Mhm.
What works for one person might not work for another.
It's about finding what nourishes our souls and makes us feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. And speaking of feeling connected or maybe disconnected, let's talk about envy. The video explores how envy can distort our perceptions, making us focus on what we lack instead of appreciating what we have.
It's that comparison trap we can so easily fall into, especially in the age of social media where everyone seems to be showcasing their perfect lives.
It's so easy to get caught in that cycle, thinking, if only I had their job, their house, their relationship, then I'd be happy.
Right.
But the video reminds us that true happiness doesn't come from external possessions or achievements. It comes from within.
And the video offers some really practical advice on how to break free from that envy cycle.
Okay.
It suggests that we focus on gratitude, celebrating our own blessings and accomplishments. It's about shifting our focus from what we don't have to what we do have.
That makes so much sense.
Mhm.
And it's a much more empowering way to live. But what about when we are struggling with those envious feelings? How can we deal with them in a healthy way?
Well, the video encourages us to examine the root of that envy.
Okay.
What is it that we're really longing for? Is it recognition, connection, security? Once we understand the underlying need, we can start to address it in a more constructive way.
So instead of comparing ourselves to others, we can focus on cultivating those qualities within ourselves.
Exactly. And the video also reminds us that everyone's journey is unique. We don't have to compare our chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20.
So true. Now, the next hidden sin on the list feels particularly relevant in our modern world, where we're constantly bombarded with messages telling us to buy more, do more, be more.
Excessive attachment to material possessions.
Yeah.
It's a trap that's easy to fall into, especially in a society that values wealth and status.
The video paints a stark picture of how materialism can take over our lives, leading us to prioritize possessions over relationships and spiritual growth.
And it argues that this pursuit of material wealth can ultimately leave us feeling empty and unfulfilled.
Right, it's like chasing a mirage that always stays just out of reach.
Exactly.
But how do we know if we've crossed that line from enjoying nice things to being consumed by them?
That's a good question. And I think it comes down to examining our motivations. Why are we working so hard to acquire more stuff? Is it to impress others, to fill a void within ourselves, or because we genuinely believe it will bring us happiness?
And I think it's also important to consider the impact our spending habits are having on our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going into debt to buy things we don't need? Are we sacrificing time with loved ones to work longer hours?
Those are all good indicators that our attachment to material possessions might be becoming a problem.
So if we recognize that we have fallen into this trap, what can we do about it?
The video suggests that we simplify our lives, focusing on what truly matters: our relationships, our purpose, our connection to something greater than ourselves.
It's about recognizing that true happiness comes from within, not from external possessions.
It's about aligning our values with our actions. If we say we value spirituality and relationships, but we're constantly chasing material wealth, there's a disconnect.
So it's about being mindful of our spending habits and making sure they reflect our priorities.
Exactly. And finally, let's revisit the idea of lack of love for others. The video makes a compelling argument that love is not just a feeling, but a choice we make every day.
It's about actively seeking opportunities to show compassion, kindness, and generosity, even when it's difficult.
And the video suggests that this kind of love is transformative, not just for the recipient, but for the giver as well. It opens our hearts and allows us to experience a deeper connection to ourselves and to something larger than ourselves.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected and that our actions have a ripple effect.
And even small acts of kindness can make a big difference.
So the video challenges us to ask ourselves, how can I show more love in my daily life? What small acts of kindness can I perform? What can I do to make a positive difference in the lives of others?
Those are powerful questions. And remember, love isn't just about grand gestures. It's about the little things we do every day to show others that we care. It's about being present, listening attentively, offering a helping hand, and treating everyone with respect and dignity.
I love that. It's about choosing love in every interaction, even the small ones. So we've spent the last 2 parts of this deep dive really exploring these 7 hidden sins that the video, based on Padre Pio's teachings, suggests might be blocking blessings or holding us back from true happiness. But I think it's important to remember that this isn't about dwelling on the negative or getting caught up in guilt or self-judgment.
Absolutely. It's not about labeling ourselves as sinners or feeling bad about our imperfections.
Right.
It's about recognizing patterns in our thoughts and behaviors that might be keeping us stuck.
Yeah.
And then using that awareness to make positive changes.
It's about empowering ourselves to live more fulfilling and joyful lives.
Right, exactly. And I think the video does a great job of offering practical guidance on how to do that. For example, when it comes to overcoming pride, it suggests that we focus on developing humility.
And we talked earlier about how humility isn't about putting ourselves down or denying our accomplishments. It's more about recognizing that we're part of something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
That we don't have all the answers and that it's okay to ask for help.
It's about acknowledging our limitations and being open to learning from others and from our experiences.
So instead of clinging to that I can do it all myself mentality, it's about embracing a more collaborative and supportive approach to life.
It's about surrendering some of that control and trusting that we're not alone on this journey.
Now, when it comes to dealing with resentment, the video offers this really powerful reminder that forgiveness is essential for spiritual growth.
It's about releasing ourselves from the burden of anger and bitterness so that we can move forward with a lighter heart.
But I mean, as we discussed earlier, forgiveness can be such a long and challenging process.
It is.
Especially when we've been deeply hurt.
Right.
How do you forgive someone who's betrayed your trust or caused you a lot of pain?
Yeah.
It's not easy.
It doesn't feel easy or natural.
It's definitely not easy. And the video acknowledges that.
Yeah.
It's not about condoning the other person's actions or pretending that what happened didn't matter. It's about choosing to let go of the anger and resentment that are poisoning you.
So it's not about them.
Right.
It's about us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that holding on to those negative feelings is ultimately harming us more than anyone else.
And, the video reminds us that we don't have to go through this process alone.
Mm-hmm.
We can call on a higher power for support.
Mm-hmm.
We can lean on our loved ones or seek guidance from a therapist or a spiritual counselor.
It's about surrounding ourselves with people who can help us through those tough times.
Now, let's shift gears and talk about fear again.
Okay.
The video makes this crucial distinction between fear that paralyzes us and fear that serves as a healthy caution.
We talked about this earlier, about recognizing when fear is holding us back from pursuing our dreams or living fully.
Right.
So how do we know which fears to listen to and which ones to push past? I mean, fear is there for a reason, right? It's supposed to protect us.
It is. And some fears are definitely valid. But I think the key is to ask ourselves, what is this fear trying to tell me? Is it warning me of a real and present danger? Or is it simply trying to keep me small and safe?
So it's about discerning between those fears that are based in reality
Right.
and those that are rooted in our own insecurities or limiting beliefs.
Exactly. And the video suggests that we can overcome those paralyzing fears by deepening our faith. It's about trusting that we're guided and protected, even when we face challenges.
It's about remembering that, quote, do not be afraid, just believe. Faith can be a powerful antidote to fear. But what does that mean for someone who's not religious?
That's a great question. And I think faith in this context can mean different things to different people.
Okay.
It could be about having faith in ourselves, in our own abilities, or in the goodness of humanity. It could be about trusting in the process of life, even when things feel uncertain.
It's about finding that inner strength and resilience that allows us to face our fears and keep moving forward.
Now, let's revisit the idea of spiritual indifference. The video encourages us to examine our spiritual practices and find ways to rekindle that flame. Maybe that means exploring different forms of prayer or meditation, or finding a spiritual community that resonates with us.
Or maybe it's about connecting with nature, listening to uplifting music, or spending time in quiet reflection.
It's about being intentional and proactive in nurturing our spiritual side, whatever that looks like for each of us.
And it's about recognizing that spiritual growth is an ongoing journey. It's not a destination. It's about constantly seeking new ways to connect with our inner self.
Right.
And with something larger than ourselves.
Now, when it comes to envy, the video offers some practical advice. It suggests that we focus on gratitude, celebrating our own blessings and accomplishments, rather than dwelling on what we lack.
It's about shifting our perspective and recognizing that we all have unique gifts and talents to offer the world. It's about focusing on our own lane and running our own race.
And it's also about celebrating the successes of others, rather than viewing them as a threat. It's about cultivating a spirit of generosity and abundance, recognizing that there's enough for everyone.
Now let's delve into the topic of excessive attachment to material possessions.
Okay.
The video makes a powerful case for simplifying our lives and focusing on what truly matters, our relationships, our purpose, and our connection to something greater than ourselves.
It's about recognizing that true happiness comes from within, not from external possessions. It's about finding contentment in the simple things and appreciating the beauty that surrounds us.
And it's about aligning our values with our actions.
Right.
If we say that we value experiences over things, but then spend all our time and energy chasing material wealth, there's a disconnect.
So it's about being mindful of our spending habits and making sure that they reflect our priorities.
It's about asking ourselves, does this purchase truly align with my values? Will it bring me lasting joy and fulfillment?
And finally, let's revisit the idea of lack of love for others. The video challenges us to ask ourselves, how can I show more love in my daily life? What small acts of kindness can I perform? What can I do to make a positive difference in the lives of others?
It's about making a conscious effort to be more compassionate, kind, and generous in our interactions with everyone we encounter.
It's about remembering that we're all connected and that even small gestures can have a ripple effect, creating a more loving and harmonious world.
And sometimes the most powerful acts of love are the simplest. A smile, a kind word, a listening ear.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the 7 hidden sins, I want to leave you with this final thought. These concepts aren't meant to be a checklist for guilt or shame.
Right.
They're not about judging ourselves or others. They're about using these insights as tools for self-reflection and growth.
It's about recognizing patterns that might be holding us back and making conscious choices to align ourselves with love, forgiveness, faith, and generosity.
It's about remembering that we're all works in progress, always evolving, and striving to become the best versions of ourselves.
And that, my friend, is the beauty of the spiritual journey. It's a lifelong adventure of discovery and transformation.
Beautifully said. We hope you found this deep dive insightful and inspiring. And remember, the journey continues. Keep exploring, keep learning, and keep growing.